You know, when you think of the 1920s, what comes to mind? Probably flappers, right? Jazz, these lavish, over-the-top parties. But really, that's only half the story. See, underneath all that glamour was this deep, collective trauma that was fueling all of that manic energy, and a fatal flaw that would bring it all crashing down.
To really get the 1920s, you have to understand where it came from. The decade was basically born in the shadow of two massive global catastrophes, the First World War and the 1918 flu pandemic. And as one historian put it, that pandemic, it was a true horror story.
And this right here, this is the crucial point. The frantic, explosive energy of the Roaring Twenties, it wasn't just a party for the sake of having a party. No, it was a direct, psychological reaction to years of just unimaginable loss. It was a generation that had stared death right in the face and decided to live loudly, with absolutely no reservations.
The sheer scale of this trauma, it's just hard to comprehend. The 1918 flu infected a third of the world's population. It killed somewhere between 50 and 100 million people. To put that in perspective, that's far more than World War I itself. So the decade that followed, it was this desperate, dazzling attempt to just outrun that memory.
So how does a world even begin to recover from something like that? Well, it accelerates. It grabs onto radical, rapid change that makes everything feel new again. The 1920s was a decade where technology just completely transformed daily life, shrinking the world and speeding everything up.
I mean, the pace of change was just breathtaking. In only 4 years, we went from silent movies to talking cartoons. The very first television was invented, and then Charles Lindbergh flies across the Atlantic, turning what was a weeks-long journey into a 33-hour flight. All of a sudden, the impossible started to feel possible.
Now, this technological whirlwind was matched by a total cultural explosion. After the war, the old rules just felt, well, inadequate. So a new generation just kind of threw them out. And you could really see this in their entertainment and their social norms.
The Charleston dance is a perfect example. It totally captured the new mood. It was fast, it was chaotic, and this is the key part, you could dance it all by yourself. This was a complete break from the formal partnered dances of the past. This was the dance of individualism, of liberation.
At the very same time, a totally new kind of celebrity was being born out in Hollywood. The studio's star system, it wasn't just about finding great actors. It was about manufacturing idols. It was about creating these perfect, glamorous personas for the public to just adore.
But, behind the curtain, it was a whole different story. The studios controlled everything. They changed names. Think about it. Archibald Leach became Cary Grant. They enforced these strict morality clauses in contracts, and they even arranged fake dates, all for publicity. It was this carefully constructed fantasy, an illusion of perfection for an audience that was just desperate for some escapism.
Okay, but all of this, the cultural energy, the technological boom, it was all built on an economy that felt unstoppable. But here's the catch. It was running on borrowed time. And it was being held back by a dangerously outdated way of thinking.
And that's the central question of the entire decade, isn't it? With so much progress, so much prosperity, how did it all just end in a total disaster? Well, the answer lies in an idea that, at the time, was considered completely untouchable. As economists from MIT explain, the key was what they called the gold standard mentality. Now, this wasn't just an economic policy, it was an ideology. To the leaders of the time, it represented stability, it meant international prestige, a return to the certainty they had before the war. It was this rigid belief that the value of your nation's currency, which was pegged to gold, had to be defended above all else.
When you compare that to today, the contrast is just stark. In a crisis now, modern governments try to stimulate the economy, protect jobs. But under the gold standard, the priority was the exact opposite. Preserve the currency's value no matter the cost, even if that meant rising unemployment and a shrinking economy. It was a completely rigid system in a world that desperately needed flexibility.
So this obsession with gold, it basically became a pair of economic handcuffs. When the global economy started to stumble, the world's leaders were trapped. They couldn't, or maybe they just wouldn't, do what was needed to stop the fall, because their own core beliefs were actually making the problem worse.
And so, the decade-long party, this whole thing built on a mix of real innovation and super fragile economics, it finally came to a sudden, absolutely brutal end.
The date is infamous, right? On Black Tuesday, the stock market bubble just burst.
Billions of dollars in wealth completely evaporated in a matter of hours. The Roaring Twenties were officially over.
And the shock on Wall Street, it just rippled outwards. This wasn't just some financial event. It was the start of the Great Depression, a brand new global trauma that would go on to define the next decade for millions and millions of people.
When you look back, the arc of the 1920s is just so dramatic. It was a decade born from the silence of grief that then exploded into this roar of life, only to end in the deafening silence of a total economic collapse.
So what's the takeaway here? The 1920s followed this incredible cycle, a massive trauma followed by a frantic recovery that ended up creating its own catastrophe. It's a really powerful reminder of just how quickly things can change. And it leaves us with a critical question. What can this story teach us about recognizing the breaking points in our own time?